Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bible and Archaeology Live. I am not in the regular spot today, and there's no Bob because it is freezing in Iowa. And by that, I'm being kind because it's like minus 25 or something outside. I don't know. It's something crazy. So a little bit of a different look, but happy to be with you. Have some roundup return things from last time's live. If you are joining live today, lovely to have you with. Throw a question into the chat. Happy to come to things as they come in if you're watching live. But I did see some questions from people who were watching on replay. And as I said, as I always say, if you're not here live and you throw a question in on replay, I'll come to some of those as we can. As I can, there's more than, necessarily we can always come to, but happy to get to what I can. Sorry, just getting some things set, always a little bit of a change in setup, but happy to have you here with me this Friday. I hope you're doing well. I hope it is warmer wherever you are than it is here. And that's early announcement, first kind of announcement update type of thing, because this has been teased for a while, and it's going to be rolling out here at the end of this month. If you are a member on Patreon, you might have seen something that looks a little bit different, or maybe some changes. I'm just going to open up, I think. Let's double check here. Open up Patreon page. Announcement. Yeah. So if you are on Patreon, this probably looks familiar. If you're not, this is what our Patreon teased looks for a while. I'm talking about it because my screen it's going to be rolling out here at the end of this month. Ignore that little black. If you are a member on Patreon, you might have seen because you're going to see something that looks here, a little bit is if you go down past the bonus or maybe some changes. I'm just going to open up courses page. I think some of these right now should look familiar because this is early announcement. So if you first kind of are on Patreon, this probably looks familiar. If because this has been slight change coming for a while. I'm talking about the way this Patreon has made some changes to their shop setup here at the end of this month. Ignore that little black. If you are a member on Patreon, they've done some things because you're going to see something that looks here, which is if you go down past the bonus, or maybe some changes. I'm just going to open up courses. But if you are interested in more from Bible and Archaeology, if you've considered Patreon in the past, we're starting something new there, which is at that $20 tier, which gets you early access to ad-free podcasts, the bonus podcasts, bonus clips. You're also now going to be getting the course content. So right now, the city's course content is available. Each of those individual lectures, you can go in and get access to those through that. It's now called like the Scholars tier at $20. We're also going to be releasing... Oh, you're getting the audio twice? Are you still getting audio twice? No? If it is, that's really weird. I don't know what happened there. The other screen. Okay, so it's something about the second screen problem. Good to know. Well, apologies for that. I don't need to be in your ears twice. We'll stay away from that page then. But over there on that, you're going to get the cities class. We're also going to be releasing, we recorded a class with Bob on the history of Jerusalem. And so the lectures for that are going to be coming out in installments over weeks to that tier. We are also going to be going forward. There's going to be some more class content that comes that way. We did a survey through Patreon for people that are already there for what kind of course content they might like. We've talked some about this here too, but things like guided readings, things like Zoom lectures with a Q&A at the end, things like sometimes something we've had some questions about is doing not full language courses, but stuff like languagey, like walking through individual verses and doing translation a little bit at a time to help kind of like, hey, you kind of want to know some of the translation-y problems that maybe are existing, like in Genesis 1:1. And you don't know Hebrew, but we can use that as installments. So there's going to be that kind of class stuff across a whole bunch of different topics that will live in that scholars tier over on Patreon that you will have regular access to as a member of that tier. If that's something that you're interested in. If you're not, happy to have you whatever way you want to participate, how you want to come in. But it's something we've been teasing for a little bit, so I wanted to announce, hey, that's there now. If you've been considering the cities class, you can go and get those right now. And then next week, we will be dropping the first Jerusalem lecture in, and then they'll be rolling out from there. Our plan is basically 2 course things a month as kind of our regular. Sometimes if we're really feeling, inspired or we've got special opportunities, that may go up at times. But 2 is the number that we're going to be looking at from talking to people. How much availability or interest do you really have? So that's something that you can go over there. That's there. So there's your kind of housekeeping Patreon-y. We appreciate your support. We know that that's not for everyone, and no worries if not. But if it's something you've been thinking about, wanted to let you know. So, Subala, coming to your question here before we go back. Thank you for the super chat. If you've got a question you want us to look at, whether we can answer it now or in the future, throw it there. It was scribed that the Sim2 of the Musari is Azupiru. Is this the appropriate symbol derived from the Sar of Sar King Sargon? Is this appropriate symbol derived from the Sar of Sar? I mean, this is, again, one of those etymology questions that I know you love. And you probably hate that my gut answer is always like the etymological connections are notoriously sticky in trying to like definitively prove. Could it be? I mean, I could see a pathway that you would say there's a way to think through that those could be. And ideas, I mean, especially if we're looking towards royal ideologies and gardens, and the importance there between that. I mean, if you're thinking into like the larger palatial residences, garden structures, and their connections to hunting, to fertility, to the ideas of divine gardens, kingship and divinity, I could see like a conceptual framework that could lie behind that might partake. I couldn't say that I know more than thinking that could be a pathway that someone might expect, or argue for through that. That would be my thought. That'd be my thought as to why that might be the symbol that could be derived, but I don't have like this is the immediately, I know for sure someone who has argued that. That would be my guess. But yes, Kate M. Bradford, happy to see you. If you have to dip, that's just fine. Happy to have you along. Becca, nice to see you too. Thanks for dropping in. And you had asked a question about some resources, Becca, that I think I said, like, email me on. You were asking about children's or resources available for kids. Is that right? I want to say, if you still have questions on that, send us an email, bible-archaeology@uiowa.edu, with more of what you're thinking about. If there's a way we can be of help, happy to be. Something that I would say, and it's not here, it's at the office, is a book that I'd recommend for basically anybody, if your question is archaeology focused, is The 5-Minute Archaeologist. It is a wonderful, helpful little book with chapters that are intended to be read in 5 minutes, that are written by archaeologists, a wide number of archaeologists, covering all kinds of topics, from things like how do you pick what site to excavate, who pays for things, what is a tell, down into things like what's an artifact, what's an eco-fact, over into stuff like what happens to stuff after it gets found. All these types of things explained by the archaeologists who do this in really short, snippety ways that I think is helpful for anyone, but is definitely digestible at I think it does make sense for like a kid reader, or if you're reading it with a kid to explain, or to an adult reader as well, because they include at the end, like, here's more resources if you're interested. So that would be a book that I'd say, hey, might be a thing to look at there. If it's more Bible related, no, you're okay. No worries about having to email yet. Just thinking, I saw you here, want to jump on that. Bible related stuff, if you're looking, that can be harder, because like children's biblical content has a propensity to underestimate the intelligence of the readers, maybe we should say. And I know that I went to a session this last SBL that was the Bible for normal people doing some biblical stuff. Now they're coming to this from a confessional perspective, which it's not a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing. It is their approach, right? That's something you should know. That's their approach when they're coming to that. But bringing in different scholars to work through materials, that might be something of interest. I haven't seen any of it. I haven't read any of it, other than kind of some of the samples they showed there. But I do know a variety of some of the people who have participated in those materials that are good scholars. I don't know all of them, but some of them I'm like, okay, I know your other work, and so the work that you're going to be doing here, if it's like that other work, probably good. So that might be another thing to look at there. So just kind of come through -4 Fahrenheit. Yeah, coming through the audio. I'm glad it was fixed. Thank you for letting me know. And always, we are all humans. If there's ever a problem like that, be sure to let me know. I really appreciate it. Happy to fix things. Oh, something else I should mention about while we're talking about fixing things is if you listen to the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, if you're an audio only podcast fan over on Spotify, you may have noticed that there are Spotify ads in there now. And this was the first week that those ran, and they put in more than I thought they were going to. So apologies if you were like a first dose, because it ran like a pre-roll ad and then an ad like a minute in. I've removed that. We are going to have ads in there. Just it's a part of the nature of like the trying to, those help support the project to make this stuff go. I appreciate your understanding in that. I apologize if that's unbearably intrusive to you. As always, ad-free content exists over on Patreon because your support there makes it so that we don't have to do that, and appreciate that. If you can tolerate it, appreciate that too. But I hope you can I hope you can understand some of that as we go through, but I just wanted to mention that is there. So now the home for, all ad-free content. Patreon's the home for all ad-free content. The Spotify thing, it's a whole bunch of like backstory stuff you don't need to worry about. And so question we saw from another video, CJ recently, where he said that Paul didn't know. I'm sorry, Kate Tempest, not sure if you're still here for the CJ that you're talking about, where he said that Paul didn't know about Judas and that Judas was invented. Is that something many scholars think? If so, are there any theories about where Judas and his betrayal came into the narrative? I'm not sure if you're still here. I don't know what CJ you mean, because I'm not. Something I am going to be talking to, we're going to be talking to, I mentioned this a little while ago, Robin Walsh about Paul. So let me say I can add this in because like there is conflicting Judas stuff, right? Paul, no Judas. Sorry, just make myself some notes for that. There's conflicting Judas materials, yes, right, with some of what happens there, which the whole question of like, were they real? Did they know? What did they know? What did Paul know or not know? How much comes later? Those are places that lots of people debate. I'd say if you want to see some perspectives, you like James Barker in our interview there talked about Paul as kind of like their perspective is Paul is lurking in the background of the Gospels. And so does Paul know the gospel material? How much gospel material might Paul have influenced? And then if you're looking at ways traditions have expanded and developed over time, like the role of Judas as a betrayer or the value of that, what version of that may Paul have known? If that's a real thing, if that's not a real thing, where do you sift those types of stuff out? I think CJ Cornway. Okay, that's what I was thinking you might have meant. I haven't watched that. I haven't seen that from them, so I don't want to. I'm not sure what their argument is. I'd say it wouldn't surprise me. Again, New Testament-y stuff. I have experience with, not my full wheelhouse. I could definitely see a pathway where people might argue. Definitely might argue is a weird way to say that. That Judas material expands in a way that Paul may not have if Paul is writing when people want to say Paul is originating stuff in a way that maybe predates some other things or traditions, may not have known all that material. But I can look at that and see, and if there's something that feels like a helpful question I can return to talk about more. But I might bring that up with Robin to say, hey, when we're talking about Paul, because we get a lot of materials and traditions that expand around Paul, that I could ask Robin that when we're going to talk, because we're going to be talking about Paul some as somebody that we haven't somehow talked about, but is around a ton of things. So we'll throw that in there. Sargon was in city of Azpir in the passage. Sargon's origin related to is the passage. Sorry, we did get a comment about me mumble reading questions, which you're absolutely fair. Sargon was from. We'll note this. Sargon was from the city. Azupiranu is the passage about Sargon related to Daniel 4:33. Let me pull up Daniel 4:33. Immediately his sentence was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven away from human society, ate grass like oxen until his body was bathed with the dew of heaven, till his hair grew as long as eagles. Yeah, this is a really fun one with Nebuchadnezzar and his descent out into madness, which there's different arguments about who that might be trying to draw an idea from, if it's related to something. Is it related to that? I mean, Daniel is late, which always creates some problems in trying to see ways connections might exist between discussions of Sargon's origin and then a late Daniel text, because that's going to be chronologically difficult given Sargon is far earlier than Daniel. So I might almost argue wonder if someone would say that Daniel material might be going the other direction, but I don't know. So I can look to see if we have some of this garden, Sargon, and Daniel, if I find anything that feels like a helpful or compelling answer. But Daniel's lateness in emergence, which normally the debate around Daniel is how late is Daniel, not if Daniel is late. And so that's a place where most of the debates with Daniel go, in how it's talking, what it knows about. So there's, a chronological difficulty there in trying to have those things come through together. Andy came across an extremely interesting theory that proposes the tribe of Dan to be both Philistines and the Denyen Danu of the Sea Peoples. Have you heard this theory? If so, thoughts? I haven't. Could you say where'd you see that? If you're still there, Andy, where you saw that float in? Was it in an article, or was it a video theory? Just trying to see where it might have come from. There are, I'd say, lots of conversations happening about the origins of the tribes, potential identities within the tribes. That's something that has been a place of conversation for a long time, and in ways that are expanding into new potential connections. And so I haven't seen one that says that Dan would be both the Sea Peoples and the Denyen. So just see if I can find what you might have found there. I mean, I see something from immediately that pops up from the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology, which we've talked about before as, how do we talk about them? They, there can be difficulties sometimes in their presentation and in what they're wanting to talk about. So what you're seeing, whether it actually came from them or if they're talking in the same way, could be the type of thing that you're thinking through. Yadin. Okay. What they have in here is that Yadin proposed the Denyen people were linked to Dan, probably based off of largely trinames. Marglith, the tribe of Dan, Sea Peoples, agreed with this. Yadin's position has come under intense fire from archaeologists who do not consider evidence within the Bible worthy of consideration, is what this article says. So, okay, so this is going to be connected back probably to that. I'd say tribe origin isn't something that I am not that I'm not interested in, but the place, that type of emergence origin story thing is difficult, because how do you sift through the sands of time in origin stories that are ripe with revision in ways that are multifaceted over different periods of time, over different interests over time? We see differences in tribe lists, right? You see differences in where people are supposed to be associated with, who's participating in what, who's in and who's out. Something like this probably has, you could see, as always, like if you're wanting to look for what types of connections might underlie ideas of origin, formation, tribal formation, settlement, things that are occurring in the late Bronze Age, stuff like the Sea People, probably play a role in the way these stories are told. Does that mean that there's a clear connection? Because we have really foggy ideas of who's connected to these groups when we see people being referred to as the sea people. Well, who is that? It's this amalgamous group or groups that are shifting, and it is both a classifier, but it's also a derogatory term. It gets used in when you're thinking of like royal inscriptions propaganda. When it's using it, can we take that at face value? No, right? You can't take those types of monumental inscriptions from the Egyptians at face value. You have to ask the same kinds of questions about that you might ask about questions of a conquest from a biblical narrative. So, I mean, I could understand the way that they come through to say like, oh, is there the scholars of Yildadin. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, like I'm going to be talking to Dr. Magnus next week, talking about Masada and Yadin as an archaeologist who is deeply connected to the history of the archaeology of Masada. And as always over time, there's been shifts in the way that the larger frameworks presented by scholars, by archaeologists, has been re-understood and reconsidered over time. The evidence is heavily textual with few inferences. Seemed like a pretty decent case. And so, yeah, I'd see that. I mean, I can understand where they would be coming from on it. I'd say I don't know what their argument is, so I don't want to speak out of line in saying, oh, this is the way that they're doing this. Would it make sense? This connects in probably also to ideas of there are arguments around, like, say, the Levites as a potentially, that's one I'm giving Phineas more attuned to. Oh, are there Levite Egyptian origin connections? Is there a connection between a group that came out of Egypt in some memory form that retains? And so those types of paths that then, okay, these tribal formations within the text, if they have these different origin stories and are, right, a group that comes together from a multiplicity and then comes in, could we identify the different ways those lines might go? This might be a pathway through that. So let me say, I mean, always happy to read, to look. So I can look. I'm sorry that I don't have a clearer answer for you on that at the moment, but I would rather tell you that this is where I'm thinking, but I'm not 100% certain because I haven't read what they've said about it. And so I don't want to speak out of line. It's an old theory, but new to me. I'd say same thing. Old theory, but new to me, which sometimes can be a good thing because old theories are not always bad. Sometimes old theories have been refined over time is in ways that make them more difficult. And some of this also connects to stuff with a wide number of these theories, like in really wanting to pin down. There is a desire, there has been a desire, to put pins in things, not just in the study of the Bible or in archaeology, right? This is something that is throughout history, right? In the study of history, we should say. Can we put a pin and really draw a line between this and that, right? There's that deep desire in the brain to go, well, where did they come from? How did that happen? Can we get to a point of an explanation? And sometimes that almost works against the point. To try so hard to get to being able to put a string in between two things and say this connects to this. Because could they? Maybe. Is that the most valuable part? Is that the most important part? Or does that pursuit almost strip away the intention of where the text is trying to push attention? And you don't have to agree and swallow the story that it wants to tell you, but we should also be asking questions about the story it wants to tell us in why, because maybe that point of origin matters. Maybe it doesn't matter. How clear can we be in identifying that type of thing? Which is where, and we got a question about this when we were talking last week about theories of origin. And again, I'd say go check out that interview with JP or read their piece on this, that in that theory of internal development, which is one proposed model. And someone asked a question like that. They were saying it sounded like Bob's proposal, like this is still a debated model, and refinements within it are various. Like there's debates within debates within debates on this. It's not something everyone agrees on or in exactly how. But in these like ideas of origin, in some ways it can help reframe questions, but there's always like a stop point where that we can't get past. You hit fogs that you can't get through. And that's usually when there's a fallback that can be made. Sometimes that's when we hit a fallback point where people will apply to shaky evidence. And so asking questions at a certain point, we can start to run into something. And so they asking the questions do a lot. Yes. In a wide variety of ways, but we also have to acknowledge at times you're dealing with the text that is edited and redacted and composed over time by many hands, that has a complicated history of its own and the way it wants to talk and argue with itself, right? The text is always arguing with itself. It is not univocal. It is not a monolith. It did not emerge at once. It disagrees with itself. And so looking at those moments and ideas of origin, or that can be a place where you can see different questions that emerge that maybe work against that, trying to track down to an origin thing. So long-winded way to say I haven't read it. I could see where they might be coming from with some of it, but I would almost ask, like, sometimes maybe people might push on it and say it might be leading us in the wrong path of questions when we go to doing some of that. Question on Pentateuch and Hexateuch theory. With regard to Josiah finding Deuteronomy in the temple, do scholars have any idea of how the original Pentateuch transitioned to Joshua and Judges? Yeah, so Josiah's finding of Deuteronomy, whether you take that or not, does it have problems? It does. It does a lot of things politically that maybe should lead you to ask questions about, oh, hey, look at this text that I found that does a lot of things that I would really like. Was it really there, and was it lost? Was it not lost? Was it composed? Is that the moment an origin story to explain a period of composition? And those things line up pretty clearly. Do scholars have any idea of how the original Pentateuch transitioned to Joshua and Judges? Is a place where there's like so much argument on Hexateuch versus Pentateuch, on where seams might have existed, on texts arising in between. Judges as well is one where, like, the form of Judges that we have, there's all kinds of proposals for, should you take Judges in the way it is? Should Judges be reorganized? Did chapters from Judges get moved around? Is stuff that's at the front of Judges actually, should it be at the later end of Judges? And maybe it should be, but it's organized in a literary form to show a descent into madness, maybe as things get further out of control. And so stories were reorganized to show that type of procession. So we should ask questions about this because there's internal inconsistencies between these types of things. So there are lots of ideas that are proposed for how it transitioned or why. That can vary. So there are ideas, there are theories. They're not uniform. They can also be really split depending on ideas of date, like how late or how early are people wanting to place things, and then place those in relationship to these texts, and how connected is everything in their ideas or times of emergence. Who might I say is a good person to look at with this? I want to say, I'll put some things in the description. Because I want to say, I know he's written on this. Thomas Roomer has written about the Hexateuch stuff. I know there's some stuff from that. I know there's some stuff from Seabass. I know there's some things, a number of people. So let me find some stuff that might be a helpful, like, quick, hey, here's an article or two that could be good to drop down into the notes for you after this is done. Thanks for the question. I do want to turn to, if you got a question and you're here live, throw it in. And okay, how helpful that makes sense. Again, this is one of those places where there's almost so many proposals. It's hard to say, like, what do scholars say? Yes, scholars say a lot of things. And then from there, like, for me, this feels very, in some ways, like aligned to my concerns or my love with Phineas, because Phineas has a problematic path from Numbers and into Joshua and Judges, especially when you start to look at the Septuagint, because Phineas is present in the book of Judges, which creates like a chronological problem. He's present because of insertion. But if you're looking at the Septuagint, Phineas dies in Joshua 24:33. There's an expansion that goes into Joshua where after the death of Eleazar, Phineas's father, Phineas ascends, and it gives like a one-line summary of Phineas served in the priesthood of his father type of thing. And then he dies. And yet Septuagint Joshua has him dying, and then Septuagint Judges has Phineas back again. So the guy that died is now alive, which leads some people to say, oh, this is a different character with the same name. Or maybe this is where some people say stuff gets moved around. Oh, it should actually be here, or it's all insertion. And so you get then different debates sometimes between the versions of the text that you're looking at too, or how late people want things to be, or where parts get moved around. So there's, in my mind, I'm going through like, oh, there's all kinds of people who are arguing for this period versus this period, or these chapters, or, oh, this was the original scene between these things, or like a Hexateuch that maybe is more preeminent than gets credit for. Let me, like, just, I know, just do a quick Google for something real quick to see if I can, because I have like half of an article title in my mind, but I can't remember the rest of it. So trying to see if I can find it for you, but I'll find something for you. Yeah. So I know, okay. So like this one, yeah, Rumor has one on the case for a Persian Hexateuch, Deuteronomy 34, the problem of the Hexateuch. Yeah, this is the one that I'm thinking of, I think, this is in this edited volume, Pentateuch, Hexateuch, or Enneateuch. Yeah, so these are, and these are works by Thomas Rumor where they're arguing for what version of this should be this or hexateuchal redaction. So I'll throw some of those down into the chat. Hold on, I'm just trying to see that this isn't frozen on you, because my computer's going very slow. I'm asking a lot of this little MacBook Air at times. And so I'll say, let me throw some of those down in below. But thank you for the question. I want to jump onto a couple things that came in from last time's live, because as I said, if you throw a question into the live, I'm happy to return. I don't know if this is still running. Hold on. I can't tell if this died, so I'm going to pause for a second and just say holding card. Okay, you're telling me, I can see in the chat here, sorry for that it's not dead. It's frozen on my side. It's just gone. I'm going to say I'm hoping it's still running. It's still telling me that it's going, but I'm just not seeing anything. So apologies for this, but I'm not, I don't want to ramble totally into the void as I ramble into the void. So if you can still see me, now it's saying it's back. I have no idea. I don't know. Okay. I don't know. It says I'm back there. So happy. Thank you for the patience. The joys of technology. Tell you what, MacBook Airs, love them, but this is pushing it to its limits, surprisingly. And so, yes, have you ever I want to say, if you run out of super chat questions, let me see if I can come back to your question about after the historical timeline, because I want to jump onto something that kind of connects to some of that from things last time. So, because as I said, I do go back to look through comments if you were watching on replay. So if you're watching a live on replay and you have a question, drop it into the chat. I'm going to pull some. I always try to pull some for next time. So someone asked a question on the book of Esther. Does the story or the book of Esther have any truth to it? Why did they keep that book? The book of Esther, this like broader conceptual idea of does it have truth? With anything that is in this world of literature, this ties kind of into that, like, well, was Abraham real style of question. Does Esther have any truth? This is where people will point to, oh, does it have knowledge of court systems or of structure? I saw a paper recently where they were arguing that there's overlaps between the archaeological remains of a palace complex and some of the description of a palace complex in Esther, showing that the author or authors have knowledge of this structure. Some of that seems to bear out. Some of it felt a little bit, like not totally sure. Why did they keep the book in the canon is another debate, because not everybody does, right? Esther is one of the books that's not present at or not connected in Qumran, not a part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, because original Esther doesn't mention God. And so why does that end up staying? Well, it is participating in this later novella style of literature. It is a story that shows the success of individuals in foreign lands, in foreign palace complex. You can see similarities with Joseph traditions in that. You see similarities to Daniel materials. And so it does something for a community that decided to keep it. And what it does is varied in nature, because it does a lot of things for different people, but it's something that was a spot of debate. And one of those that's like, oh, not all these clear the hurdle to make it in as easily as some other ones do. So does it have any truth in it? When you're asking that question about anything, that's where if you say no to that, someone's going to pull out a detail to say, but what about this? And if you say yes to it in the same way, people are going to pull out details and say, well, these things are wildly. So that's, again, I might almost say like, not the wrong question to ask, but it's asking a question of the text that it may not be intending for you to care about in how we think through these types of things. So I'd say, difficulty with that. Another question that came from last time's live is connected to this, which is tied to the idea of the Merneptah stele, mentioning Israel. And what Bob had said there was, because of that, maybe a 1% chance, I think is what they had said, that an Abraham can be real. And their question was, they don't see why would that give an idea of a connection there. And that's a place where I go like, I can hear I can definitely see that, because the idea of a reference of an Israel as a people and the connection to Abram or Abraham tradition, that becomes something that is a claimed legacy within the text. Merneptah on its own gives no point of connection between that Israel and an Abraham. A later community that refers to itself as Israel claims an Abraham. And so it's almost like I would say, more circuitous path that, like, in thinking back over what Bob had said, you're like, yeah, no, I can definitely see where you're going to ask that question. Because Merneptah and that reference to Israel doesn't have a tie. It doesn't have a tie to Abraham. And in the same way that if we're talking about, always discussed one, Teldon and the house of David, that doesn't give an existence of a David in the way the Bible talks about a David. It gives a point you could put your finger on to say, at this point in time, a group knew itself as descendant of this, that is a name that's claimed at that point in time for those individuals. But it can't tell us about the murky pasts of who that individual might have been within those things. So I think there's a kind of maybe a similar point through both of those, where some individuals might say, oh, because of this reference, we can say this about these individuals, and others who say, that point of connection doesn't exist, or is far weaker than I might want to stand on, let's say. And so in reviewing that, I might go like, yeah, I think in the moment, I know I was reading comments. I probably should have asked Bob to clarify what they meant there, but just to clarify, like, yeah, it doesn't mention Abraham. And so that's a point of like, oh, we're seeing a descendancy through the text that we want to keep on. Becca, Esther is excellent literature. Whether she's real or factual would be hard to prove. It is a fun book to pick apart. It also, I'd say, if you love Esther, Becca, check out our interview with Adam on Haman, because they have a wonderful book about Haman and Haman's reception across Christian, Jewish, and Islamic tradition, and this expansion of Haman into this larger-than-life villain. When Haman in the text is a very ineffective character. Within the narrative, what Haman accomplishes is their own defeat. They are not successful in being a villain. They're a pantomime villain almost. And the way they've grown out of that is interesting, and the way they get connected to other traditions is interesting. So I think you might like that interview if you're interested in some more on Esther and questions we could be asking about Esther and how that goes. Let me see. We had a question. So we did put out a video this week on Jericho because we were getting emails, right? I was getting a number of emails. Happy to hear from you if you have questions, if you have concerns. We were getting a number of emails with the same quotes being pulled from, hey, Lorenzo Negro has said this, this, and this. Why aren't you guys talking about this? And the reason why in that video I didn't say like, oh, it's coming from this place, it's based off of this article or off of this video or off of this person's thing, is because I don't know. I'm not sure. And so I'm not trying to like duck somebody there, but I don't want to put it onto somebody that isn't who it was. And so we were just getting an inundation of emails saying, what about this? And that's why I picked those things that we did regarding the EB and LB wall confusion with Garstang, regarding the Middle Bronze destruction, regarding Late Bronze Age settlement, and like those things. Because those are the points that were being presented in the emails, which were just avoiding other elements within that. And so if you find, like, if you're like, oh, I think this is what it was, I think I have some suspicions on where it might have been coming from, but I don't want to point a finger at somebody unfairly. Okay? So in that, though, Lorenzo Negro's article puts, they had the biblical timeline at 1480. And this is something we've had some questions on in comments on that. And again, in reflection, I'm like, I should have said maybe a little bit more there, because that 1480 date is maybe not the date you're most used to hearing. It is a date that gets proposed by some off of biblical chronologies, but it's not the most common. 1406, 1405 is a common one, 1220-ish is a common one. But there's a whole bunch of different ranges in the 15th to 13th century that different people will point to if you're trying to construct a biblical chronology of the conquest to say it occurred according to the biblical chronology at this time. And the reason you can end up with so many different dates is because you're going to have, okay, you go to 1 Kings 6, it's going to give you something. But then if you look at the Septuagint, it changes. And so Septuagint 1 Kings 6 versus the Masoretic 1 Kings 6 gives us a different run of years. Septuagint is going to give us in the 450th year, whereas the Masoretic text gives us 480th year. Okay, so what do you do with that? If you're going to look towards something like the chronology of the Judges as provided by the book of Judges, that can start to open up different spans of time. You got to add in other things onto that. But those numbers don't quite add up. If you want to look towards like chronologies, genealogies and chronicles, which are not dated, but well, how long are you saying the generation is, and how does that build up, and comparing that type of a genealogy to a genealogy that comes from Ruth, and comparing that to like, well, Acts 13 gives a different timeline. You end up with all of these different math equations where people are trying to take all of these systems and push them together into one system that makes sense with itself, because they're not in agreement. They give you different outcomes. And so 1480 is one outcome that people can come to. It's not the only. Any way you go about it, though, it's not a systematic chronology for this that can be relied on. It is presenting numbers that are of value within the tradition and the story that it is talking about, that matter for that in ways that matter for that and should be understood within that story. The way Chronicles is using a genealogy is different than the way that Ruth is using a genealogy. The spans of time in Judges are different and intentional in the way Judges wants to talk about time as compared to the way Kings wants to talk about time in a temple ordination symbolic style. Judges is also doing something symbolic with its numbers, but differently. And so those systems don't quite align. But any way you go about that, you're going to run into problems in trying to pair any of those dates that you're finding interpretively with the archaeology on the ground. And so in this, right, that someone's comment was not clear who you're responding to. It's not clear because I don't know exactly who. It's emails. I'm not going to put people's emails on blast with it. But what they wanted to say is that they don't look for smoking gun evidence for particular specific events, just a general fit. That means the events could possibly have happened. It means the story could be true. That's not nothing. It has evidential weight in any cumulative case. And in this, I would say, like, we run into a number of things here where if you're wanting to then turn to archaeology to support this, you have to do interpretation on both sides that damages both sides. We're not looking for smoking gun evidence. Not everyone is. Some people are. Not everyone is. For particular specific events. And a part of why not everyone is because we don't have that kind of smoking gun evidence for particular specific events, except in very rare instances. And even then, layers of interpretation have to come in through the archaeological excavation. There's interpretation that happens in that and in the understanding of what the artifact is and what it says, as well as the text. But a general fit, that means events could possibly have happened. Yes, there's lots of ways general fit and could possibly have happened. That doesn't mean much, though, because that's the same thing as saying the late Bronze Age gives a general fit for the backstory behind things. That doesn't mean you can tie those things together, but it is the world out of which these stories, this literature, forms a sense of the world as it understands it. That's a general fit. Could possibly have happened. Lots of things could possibly have happened. That doesn't give support then for a thing to have happened. It means the story could be true. It has evidence. So like this type of then hedging on hedging on hedging is the way to try to back away usually from saying, I'm pointing to the archaeology until the archaeology doesn't support it. I want the specifics of the archaeology to say I have a thing to point to. And then once it becomes hazy, a recourse to the generalization to say, well, no, I don't really want the specific. And then, but I'm also not willing to give the archaeology away because I do want to point to something more than a specific. And it's this kind of back and forth that usually comes up when you're trying to make these two systems work together in a way that they don't really work together. And something people love to point out normally is they'll talk about like archaeologists, that there's this line that like archaeologists love to use the Bible when they're excavating. Yeah, archaeologists, if you're excavating in regions that are connected to narratives, they'll look at, sure. But that doesn't mean they're using that as the guidebook for where and how and every. That's a misunderstanding of how that's occurring. I'd say that is more in line with early archaeological efforts that are saying, I have a reference here. Can I find the place as I think it's described in this text and then dig to support that? That was a process that took place. Unfortunately, it is still a process for some that takes place. But to say that archaeologists, are aware of the Bible or know of the Bible and they're discussing that that's shifting things around a little bit in ways that are sometimes, maybe not intentionally duplicitous, but can be. So just wanted to return to some comments from that. I'm glad you saw the Heyman interview. Happy to have found you through that. I'm glad you enjoyed it. The book is great. I think it's well worth the read if you're interested in that type of interpretive tradition for you. There was somebody asked a question earlier on that I skipped that I didn't get to. I have never made a Jesus fish in a tie. I have not made a Jesus family tree. My perspective on genealogies in the Bible is largely in the idea that they are of value to the people who propose them. The people who created them see great value in the genealogy, but genealogies are suspect, and genealogies can be manipulated, and genealogies can be adjusted over time to fit the needs that you need them to have, which is why genealogies don't always stack up with each other, because you're telling a story through that genealogical path. So no, I haven't done that. There was a question somebody asked. Would it be possible to quickly go over the historical critical time periods that scholars consider when going through the texts of the Bible? Paleolithic to Neolithic to Bronze Age. Okay, so a large question, because the time periods that you need to consider when going over the Bible might depend on who you're talking to. Late Bronze Age on is when you're going to start to have considerations of what might have been at play in some of this. But if you're wanting to say for a sense of things that are lying behind it, late Bronze Age can give you a sense of things that might be lying behind some of those early origin-y stories. People will want to propose, oh, we can see connections between maybe Abram and Middle Bronze Age, early Bronze Age movements and this and that. Or maybe like Bronze Age is kind of where if you're reaching back behind that, we're not finding things in Neolithic that have connections to what we're seeing in biblical literature. Iron Age is giving us connections, right? So Bronze Age, EB, Middle Bronze, Late Bronze, maybe more firmly, and even then it's still pretty like, when we get to Late Bronze. Moving into the Iron Age, as we're going through the Iron Age, that's when we start to see some things that, okay, we have sites that connect to sites, then there may be a shared identity between the Bible discusses a site being present here, and there's ruins that are present there, there's fortifications, there's a city that's there. That's when we start to go, okay, we have confirmation between a story and an artifact. Confirmation in a way that something happened here. Neither version of accounts can be fully trusted, but something took place here. That's when we start to go, okay, we have references to kings that we find in external corroborative accounts or events that align with those things as we're moving through Iron Age. Persian and Hellenistic period are also time periods. So if going Bronze, if you're looking for Hebrew Bible, Bronze into Hellenistic, depending on what you're wanting to look at, are time periods that you should be paying attention to in different ways. But it can also shift because some people are going to be proponents of early writing and formation, and so you need to focus more Iron Age. There are proponents who would argue, no, more texts come late, and we should be looking more at Persian and Hellenistic text ideas and formations behind those kinds of things. So I was trying to use that as an example. Maybe I misunderstood your question. Use that as an example of timeline terms. Oh, I was more trying to find out what the terms like exilic. Oh, okay. Yes. So exilic, Second Temple. Second Temple period is in reference to post-exilic materials. And that's a broad category because that is coming in after the Babylonian destruction, right? And then we go into exile 586, begins our exilic period when Cyrus allows return. We have an end of the exilic period and a beginning of the post-exilic periods, which kind of like has an overlap there with I feel like there's somebody who has a really helpful chart that you might like with this, but I can't remember because maybe I'm just imagining my own brain. Sorry, as you listen to me type. So you have the exilic period that runs in, and then, when we're looking at Cyrus, okay, Cyrus allows the return 530s. It's like 538, 537 allows the return back, which is then going to be the end of our exilic period. Not everyone returns, but then the start of the Second Temple period is going to be once construction has occurred and takes place. And so then you're starting to look later down, 515-ish, but that's going to run until the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. So the Second Temple period is a very large span of time, which is where then refinements usually get discussed by saying like useful charts might have been a place that might be who I'm thinking about. Yeah. Second Temple period is usually going to see more refinements into like early or late, or we're going to have Hellenistic, or you're going to have Roman period as like, okay, movements within the Second Temple period that are in this. And so you can also see like post-exilic, exilic, and then post-exilic. When people are talking about post-exilic texts, they're talking about after 538, or sometimes that gets used to cover that window between the start of Second Temple. Sometimes people will continue that. It's a place where there's slippage in terminology usually, and most people will have a little footnote that says like, I'm using this term in reference to this window of time, because not everybody talks about it the same, or how they want to talk about it can be a little bit different. So yeah, those are complicated like terminologies, because the timelines will also, you'll see lots of the like date/date, and maybe those can change because like how certain are we that these come in at the times that they do, and yeah, so those are large terms, yeah, Second Temple period, you're going to be looking at. Exilic period, you're going to be looking at. Post-exilic period is one you're going to be seeing a lot. And then where you're going to have, like when we're talking, people also use the period of like a united monarchy, divided monarchy, First Temple period as pre-Babylonian, and those spans of time to go. Like as we're talking about united monarchy, Saul, the idea of Saul and David's reign in the text, which is short, then leading into the period of the Davidic, the split in the divided monarchy, beginning and running on, where you're going to have Solomon as well, united monarchy. I don't know how I left Solomon out there. And then getting into the divided monarchies to run along until you get to, you're going to have then also the fall of the northern kingdom, 722, right? The Assyrian destruction there and the removal of those tribes, the lost tribes, as another key point as a deportation period. And once we come into, there's also multiple Babylonian deportations that precede the events of the destruction of the temple and that start of the exilic period. So you'll also have people talking about like, okay, the Babylonian period or the Neo-Assyrian period, as some of these overlapping chronologies that nest within. Like these things are kind of like nesting dolls where they line up with each other to say, we're talking about this time period and we might also be using this term as like an imperial power who's doing the same thing. So hopefully that's kind of helpful. I do think, yeah, useful charts might be the place that has, it would not surprise me at all if they have one on this. I'll add it to the notes. Let me see. Useful. If they have one, I will link it in the description down below. But for this week, I'm going to leave this one there. Thank you so much for tuning in, for hanging out, for throwing things into the chat. It's great to hang out. We will be back. I think Bob and I will be back next week. I mean, somebody will be back next week, but we'll probably be back around next week. Again, if you are interested in more in all different kinds of ways, you can get more over on Patreon, ad-free podcasts, the bonus podcast, course content, that City's course content immediately available there in that courses tier, as well as new course content, the History of Jerusalem class with Bob will be dropping there. And then also new courses like that in the future. If there are things that you're like, hey, I would love something I'm going to be looking for and asking recommendations on, is if you're interested in stuff like guided readings, which will operate differently than the bonus podcast because it's going to be like one more step. But to say like, hey, what's a text, whether not just a biblical text, but like what is a book that you are interested in walking through, or articles that you're interested in walking through that are important for understanding the scholarly perspective on something. Those are the kind of things that we're going to do as guided readings to say, here's a formative text that you should know, and what's some things you should know about that. And so those will probably be broken up like a chapter or two at a time. We're not going to do a whole book in one day, but some of those, hey, I might base it off of like, here's a reading list, like a reading list that you should have, and we're going to work through some of these. We might start with journal articles, but if there's specific books that you're like, oh, this is one that I keep punting on reading and we can come to, those can be helpful in guiding that. Did you see my message? I was referring to the brothers. Oh, yes. No, the immediate family. Yeah, the immediate family, not the full genealogy. No, I haven't. But yeah, thank you for coming in. It's so nice to see you. Appreciate the patience with the technological difficulties. If you're watching this on replay, if I can cut out the technological difficulty, you might be looking at this going, I have no idea what you're talking about, because I think I can cut that part out. If I can't, I appreciate your patience in staying with us. And if you haven't seen our podcast this week, I think it was really interesting. It was on the history of sacrifice, which is it was interesting. The book is really interesting too, with Jonathan Sheehan. And check it out. Like the difficulty of Christianity's struggle with sacrifice, and why it hangs around in the ways, even though they maybe want to get rid of it. So go and check that out. But thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. See you around.